She thought he was just a lonely customer until she found out he owned the entire hotel she worked. Maria had worked at the hotel for almost 3 years, and in that time, she had grown used to the rhythm of her job. Every morning she would put on her uniform, tie her hair neatly, and take her place behind the front desk. The hotel was not one of the biggest in the city, but it had a steady flow of guests, business travelers, tourists, families, and sometimes people who just needed a quiet place to stay for a few days. Maria liked the job because it gave her the chance to meet new people every day, but it could also be tiring. Long hours on her feet, handling complaints and making sure every guest felt welcome took both energy and patience. Still, she carried herself with a smile, because she believed kindness made a difference. Her colleagues often joked that Maria had a gift for noticing the smallest details. If a guest looked worried, she would sense it right away. If someone seemed lonely, she would make small talk to lift their mood. That was why she noticed the man who came to the lobby cafe almost every evening. He wasn't someone who drew much attention. In fact, most people might not even remember seeing him. He dressed simply, usually in plain shirts and dark trousers, and he always carried a small notebook with him. He would choose the same corner table near the window, order a cup of tea or a light meal, and spend hours there quietly. Sometimes he would write in his notebook, and other times he would just watch the world go by. At first, Maria thought nothing of it. Guests came and went, and it wasn't unusual to see someone spend more than a few days at the hotel. But this man seemed different. He didn't behave like a typical traveler. He never asked about tourist spots, never inquired about transportation, and never seemed in a hurry to check out. He was simply there, night after night, as if the cafe was a part of his daily routine. Maria guessed he might be staying for work reasons, or maybe he just enjoyed the quiet environment. She noticed he was always polite to the staff, never demanding, and always tipped fairly. Yet there was something about his lonely presence that made her curious. Sometimes, when her shift was slow, Maria would walk over to his table while refilling his tea or delivering his meal. She would start with small conversations, asking if the food was fine or if he needed anything else. He would usually respond with a gentle smile and a simple answer, never speaking too much but never unfriendly either. Slowly, she learned little things about him. He liked tea more than coffee. He preferred reading newspapers over watching television. He enjoyed quiet spaces more than crowded ones. He seemed like a man who carried many thoughts inside but shared very few with the world. Maria found herself wondering about his life. Did he have family? Did he travel alone often? Why did he always look thoughtful, as if something weighed on his mind? She didn't ask too many personal questions after all. It wasn't her place as a receptionist, but she couldn't help but feel that behind his calm face was a story she did not know. In her heart, she simply labeled him as the lonely guest, someone who perhaps didn't have many people to talk to, and she felt a quiet sympathy for him. Days turned into weeks, and Maria grew used to seeing him in the cafe. His presence became almost predictable. On nights when he didn't appear, she would glance toward the window corner out of habit, as if expecting to see him there. Sometimes she would even feel a little disappointed when the table was empty. Not because she missed him in any special way, but because his presence had become part of the hotel's evening atmosphere, like the soft background music or the warm glow of the lobby lights. One evening, after serving him tea, Maria noticed how tired he looked. There were faint lines on his forehead, and his eyes seemed heavy with unspoken worries. Without thinking much, she asked, "Long day?" He looked at her, surprised for a moment, and then gave a small nod. "Yes, you could say that." She smiled gently and replied, "Well, I hope this tea helps." It was a simple exchange, nothing extraordinary, but the man's expression softened. He looked at her as though he hadn't expected anyone to notice how he felt. From then on, their conversations grew slightly longer, though still casual. He asked her about her work, how she managed long hours, and whether she ever thought of doing something else. Maria laughed and admitted that yes, sometimes she dreamed of opening her own small cafe one day. The man listened attentively, and though he didn't say much, she could sense he truly paid attention. Maria did not think of him beyond what she saw: a quiet, lonely customer who passed his evenings in the hotel cafe. To her, he was just another guest, though one she remembered more than most. She never imagined he could be anything more important. In her mind, he was like a character in the background of her daily routine, someone she might one day forget once he stopped coming. But for now, he was part of her story, even if only in small ways. The other staff noticed him too, though none paid much attention. One of the waiters joked that he must be writing a book with all the time he spent scribbling in his notebook. Another receptionist guessed he might be a businessman waiting for a deal to finalize. Maria just smiled at their guesses but kept her own opinion that he was simply a lonely man who found comfort in the quiet hotel lobby. She felt a strange respect for him, because even though he seemed alone, he carried himself with calm dignity, never burdening anyone with his troubles. As the days went by, Maria's curiosity grew, but she never let it show too much. She knew boundaries mattered in her work, and she didn't want to appear nosy. Instead, she continued treating him with the same kindness she offered all guests. If he ever noticed how her words carried warmth, he never mentioned it. Yet deep inside, Maria believed that even small gestures of kindness mattered. Perhaps, she thought, her polite words and gentle attention made his evenings a little less lonely. What Maria didn't know, and couldn't have guessed, was that the man she thought was just another guest was far more connected to the hotel than she imagined. For now, though, her world remained simple: a job she worked hard at, colleagues she got along with, and a quiet man in the corner cafe who, to her, was just a lonely customer. Maria had always been someone who noticed things other people overlooked. It was in her nature to pay attention. That was why she slowly began to realize that the man in the cafe wasn't just a silent guest passing time. There was something different about him. He wasn't like those who came for a night or two, rushing in and out with luggage and a busy schedule. He seemed steady, almost rooted, as though the hotel was not just a place to stay but a place he carefully observed. Whenever Maria was at the reception desk, she noticed how his eyes quietly followed what was happening around the lobby. If a guest raised their voice at the counter, he watched closely, though never interfering. If a staff member carried luggage or served food, he seemed to notice every small detail: how they spoke, how they moved, how they treated others. Maria thought it was unusual. Most guests never paid much attention to hotel operations, they were too busy with their own needs. But this man seemed to care, though he never said why. One evening, when the hotel was not very busy, Maria saw him seated in his usual spot with his notebook. He was not writing this time, just watching. A young couple had come to the desk, complaining about a mix-up in their room. Maria handled the situation calmly, apologizing sincerely and quickly fixing the problem. She kept her voice soft and reassuring until the couple smiled again and left satisfied. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the man nod slightly, almost as though he was approving her way of handling the issue. She thought she must have imagined it, but later, when she passed his table, he looked up and said, "You deal with people very well." The compliment caught her by surprise. Guests rarely noticed the effort behind her smile or her patience. Maria thanked him politely, brushing it off as casual kindness, but inside she felt a little spark of pride. It was different when a stranger noticed something she had worked hard to develop. From then on, their conversations grew a little more natural. He would sometimes ask her opinion about simple matters. One night, he asked, "Do you think guests are treated the same way everywhere, or does it depend on the staff?" Maria thought about it before answering. "I think the staff makes all the difference. A beautiful hotel is nice, but people only remember how they were treated. He nodded slowly, as if her answer mattered more than she realized. Another time, he asked her what she liked most about her job. She laughed and told him honestly that she enjoyed meeting people but disliked the long hours. He smiled gently and said, "Every job has long hours if you care enough to do it well." Maria found his words thoughtful, almost as if he spoke from experience. As days passed, Maria became more curious. She still believed he was simply a guest, but she wondered what kept him here for so long. Unlike others, he didn't seem to be in town for sightseeing. He rarely left the hotel except for short walks. He also didn't act like a businessman who came for meetings. His calm presence, his quiet observations, and the way he seemed to carry secrets within him made him a little mysterious. Her colleagues began to notice her small exchanges with him. One of the waiters teased her, saying, "Maria, your friend in the corner looks happier when you talk to him." She blushed and shook her head. "He's not my friend. He's just a guest." But deep inside, she did feel a small responsibility toward him. Maybe, she thought, he didn't have anyone else to talk to. If her kindness made his evenings better, then it was a simple thing to give. What Maria didn't know was that the man was carefully studying the hotel not just as a guest, but with a deeper purpose. He noticed how quickly the staff responded when someone needed help, how polite they were when under pressure, and how well they worked as a team. Each detail seemed important to him, but Maria had no idea why. To her, he was only a man with thoughtful eyes and a quiet nature. One night, as Maria was closing her shift, he spoke to her more directly. "Do you enjoy working here?" he asked. Maria paused. It was not the kind of question guests usually asked. She thought about it before answering. "Yes, most of the time. It's not always easy, but it feels good when a guest leaves happy." He nodded again, as though her answer confirmed something he was already thinking. The more he spoke, the more Maria realized that his questions were never random. They always had weight. He asked things like, "What would you change if you could?" or "What makes you proud of this place?" At first, she answered lightly, but later she began to wonder why he cared. She thought maybe he had worked in hotels before, or maybe he was simply a curious man who liked to hear people's thoughts. But there were moments when his expression gave away something deeper. For example, one afternoon, Maria saw him standing near the entrance, watching how the doorman greeted guests. His face was serious, as if he were silently judging whether it was done well. When he returned to the cafe, Maria teased him gently, "You watch everything like a teacher grading homework." For the first time, he laughed softly and said, "Maybe I do." That small laugh made Maria realize he wasn't as distant as he seemed. Behind his calm surface, he had warmth too. She began to look forward to their small conversations, even if they were brief. But she never suspected the truth. Her colleagues remained curious about him, but no one asked too many questions. To them, he was just a quiet man with a notebook. To Maria, he was a guest who noticed things others ignored and who somehow saw qualities in her that even her managers rarely mentioned. It felt strange, but also encouraging. Maria told herself not to overthink it. After all, she was just doing her job. Yet in her heart, she wondered why this one guest felt different from the rest. She thought perhaps it was simply because he seemed lonely, and she had always believed lonely people needed a little more kindness. What she didn't realize was that every word she spoke, every action she took, was quietly shaping his impression of not just her, but the entire hotel. The man remained a puzzle, and Maria left it at that. To her, he was still the same lonely customer who sat by the window every evening. But slowly, without her knowing, her small acts of kindness and sincerity were building a bridge toward a truth that would one day surprise her more than she could ever imagine. Maria's days at the hotel followed the same rhythm, but the man's presence had started to change how she looked at her work. His quiet way of noticing things had made her more aware too. She began to realize just how many little details shaped a guest's experience: the tone of her voice, the speed of her response, the way she smiled even when tired. She knew all of this mattered, but when she felt his thoughtful eyes observing from the corner table, she became even more careful, as though she was being silently tested without knowing why. One evening, she was surprised when the hotel manager suddenly called all employees for a quick meeting in the staff lounge. Meetings were not unusual, but what surprised her was that the man from the cafe was there, sitting casually near the back. At first, Maria thought it must be a mistake. Guests never attended staff meetings. She assumed maybe he was a consultant or someone connected to the hotel in some way, but nobody introduced him, and the manager carried on as though his presence was normal. The meeting was short, about new rules and maintaining higher service standards. But Maria's attention kept drifting to the man. He didn't speak. He didn't even make notes. He just observed quietly, his expression serious but calm. When the meeting ended, he left the room before most of the staff had even stood up. Maria's curiosity grew stronger than ever. Why would a guest sit in a staff meeting? None of her colleagues dared to ask either. They all exchanged confused looks, whispering theories to one another. Some thought he might be an inspector from a travel agency. Others believed he was related to the hotel's owner. But nobody knew for sure. That night, Maria passed by his table and decided to test her courage. With a small smile, she asked, "So, were you visiting the wrong room today, or do you secretly work here too?" For a moment, she thought he might be offended. But instead, he chuckled softly, looking up at her with a twinkle in his eyes. "Maybe I just like learning how things work," he replied. Maria tilted her head, unsatisfied with his vague answer, but she didn't press further. Still, his words echoed in her mind: learning how things work. The days that followed brought more small signs that he was not who she thought. She noticed how the manager always greeted him with unusual respect, almost like one greets someone important. The housekeepers, too, seemed to straighten up when he passed by. He was quiet, yet his presence carried weight. Maria wondered how she hadn't noticed this earlier. Was it because he dressed so simply, or because he spoke so modestly? One afternoon, Maria saw him in a corner of the lobby speaking quietly with the manager again. Their conversation was serious, though not unfriendly. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see from their gestures that the manager was listening carefully, almost as though receiving instructions. When they parted, the manager gave a respectful nod before walking away. Maria's curiosity burned hotter. What kind of guest had conversations like that with the manager? That evening, when she handed him his tea, she couldn't stop herself from asking lightly, "You must know our manager quite well." He looked up, studied her expression for a moment, and then said simply, "Yes, for some time now." Maria's heart raced a little. His answer only deepened the mystery. She smiled politely and didn't pry further, but she couldn't shake off her thoughts. The staff soon began making more guesses about him. One of the waiters insisted he must be a food critic, because he always ordered meals and watched how they were served. A bellboy was certain he must be a government officer, hiding his identity. Maria laughed at their wild ideas, but deep down, she felt none of those guesses were right. There was a calm authority in the way he moved, a kind of quiet confidence that didn't belong to a mere guest. The biggest clue came a week later. A group of investors visited the hotel to discuss business with the management. Maria had seen such gatherings before, but what surprised her was when she saw the man walk into the conference room with them. She nearly dropped the stack of papers in her hand. He was not sitting at the edge like an observer. He was seated at the center of the long table, right beside the manager. Throughout the meeting, Maria saw him speaking, gesturing, and explaining things as though he had every right to lead the discussion. The investors listened to him carefully, nodding in agreement. Maria was stunned. It was the clearest sign yet that he was no ordinary guest. She wanted to ask someone, but her pride held her back. She didn't want to look foolish for not knowing who he was. Instead, she stayed quiet and watched. Later that evening, when the meeting was over, she served him his tea as usual. This time, she couldn't hide her curiosity. "You don't look like someone who is just passing through," she said gently, almost testing him. He looked at her with a small, knowing smile. "And what do I look like?" he asked. Maria hesitated, then said, "Like someone who belongs here more than the rest of us." For the first time, his expression changed slightly, as if her words touched a truth he carried. He didn't answer directly, only replied, "Maybe one day you'll know." Then he turned back to his notebook, leaving Maria both frustrated and intrigued. The mystery only grew deeper, but Maria continued to treat him the same way. She didn't let her curiosity make her behave differently. She still saw him as a quiet, thoughtful man who seemed lonely at times, but now she added another layer to her picture of him, someone with hidden importance, someone who wasn't revealing everything. At night, as she lay in bed after work, she thought about him more than she expected. Not in a romantic way, but in the way one thinks about a puzzle that refuses to be solved. Who was he really? Why was he here for so long? Why did the staff treat him with such silent respect? The more she thought about it, the more she realized she was standing at the edge of something bigger than she imagined. And yet, even with all these clues surrounding her, Maria still held on to her first impression that he was a lonely man who liked the quiet corner of the cafe. She had no idea that the truth, when revealed, would shake her with surprise. For now, all she could do was watch the clues gather around him like pieces of a puzzle. Every day, new signs appeared. Every day, her curiosity grew. And every day, without her knowing, she was getting closer to discovering who he really was. The morning began like any other, with the hotel lobby busy as guests checked out, new visitors arrived, and staff hurried to keep everything in order. Maria was at her desk, answering calls and helping a family with their booking. She did not expect the day to hold anything unusual, but life has a way of surprising people when they least expect it. Around mid-morning, the manager announced that there would be an inspection. All staff were told to stay alert and perform their duties with extra care. Inspections happened from time to time, and though they made everyone nervous, Maria had learned to handle them calmly. She believed that if she always did her best, there was no need to fear. Still, she straightened her uniform, checked her desk twice, and reminded herself to keep smiling no matter what. Not long after, she noticed the quiet man she had grown used to seeing every evening walking through the lobby, not toward the cafe this time, but alongside the manager and two other senior staff members. He was not carrying his notebook, nor did he look like a guest today. He carried himself differently, his step steady, his gaze sharp yet composed. Maria froze for a second. Was he part of the inspection team? The staff gathered near the lounge as the manager called everyone together. To Maria's astonishment, the manager turned toward the man and, with full respect in his voice, introduced him to the staff as Mr. Harris, the owner of the hotel. For a moment, the lobby went silent. Some gasped softly. Others exchanged surprised looks. Maria's heart pounded in her chest. She felt her cheeks grow warm as she remembered all the times she had spoken to him so casually, thinking he was just a lonely customer. She had teased him, asked him direct questions, and even guessed about his life without knowing the truth. The man who had quietly sipped tea in the corner cafe was not just a guest, he was the one who owned the entire place. Maria quickly lowered her eyes, feeling embarrassed. She wondered if she had spoken too freely with him, if he had been silently judging her all along. But when she dared to glance up, she saw him giving her the same gentle smile he always had. His expression carried no sign of irritation or pride. It was as if he had never pretended at all, as if he had only wanted to see people for who they truly were. The staff stood straighter now, their voices filled with more respect whenever they spoke. But for Maria, her mind spun with thoughts. She remembered the way he had once complimented her for handling a guest kindly. She recalled his questions about whether she enjoyed her work, about what she would change if she could. At the time, she thought he was just curious. Now she understood he had been listening, not as a guest, but as someone who had the power to make real changes. Later that day, after the formal introductions, Maria found herself face to face with him again. She was nervous, her usual ease gone, but she couldn't avoid him. He ordered tea as usual, and when she brought it to his table, she hesitated before placing the cup down. I didn't know," she said quietly. Her voice trembled slightly. He looked at her kindly and replied, "That was the point. I wanted to see how people are when they don't know who I am." Maria blinked, her embarrassment slowly turning into relief. He had not minded her simple honesty. In fact, he seemed to appreciate it. She nodded, still shy, and said softly, "I just thought you were a guest who liked quiet evenings." "And that's exactly how I wanted it," he answered. "Because when people know too much, they behave differently. I wanted to see the hotel through the eyes of someone ordinary. And you," he paused slightly, "you showed me something important." Maria's eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," he said with a calm nod. "You reminded me that kindness is not a small thing. It is what makes this place feel alive. Walls and furniture don't make a hotel. People do." Her heart warmed at his words, though she still felt a little overwhelmed. She realized then that he hadn't been observing out of boredom. He had been quietly testing the very spirit of the hotel through the people who worked there. Over the next few days, things began to change. Now that his identity was known, the staff treated him with visible respect. Some seemed nervous around him, others tried too hard to impress. But Maria remained herself. She decided that if he had valued her honesty before, there was no reason to change now. She continued greeting him with the same smile, speaking with the same warmth. And every time she did, she noticed his eyes soften, as though he was glad she hadn't become someone different. Still, Maria couldn't deny that his revelation had shifted the way she thought about her work. She realized that every action mattered more than she had believed. The way she handled a complaint, the way she encouraged a colleague, even the way she smiled at strangers, each small act was noticed, perhaps not just by him, but by anyone who entered the hotel. She began to feel a deeper sense of pride in her role. One afternoon, Mr. Harris spoke to her again, this time more openly. "Do you remember when you told me you'd like to open a cafe one day?" he asked. Maria blushed, surprised he had remembered such a casual conversation. "Yes," she admitted. "It's just a dream." "Dreams matter," he said gently. "Sometimes they show us who we really are." Those words stayed with her. She thought about them long after he left the lobby. For the first time, she began to see her work not just as a job, but as a step in a larger journey. Maybe, she thought, her kindness and patience were not just small habits, they were part of something that could grow into the dream she once mentioned so lightly. As the inspection days ended, the hotel staff felt proud when Mr. Harris praised them for their efforts. But Maria knew that what mattered most was not the praise, but the lesson she had learned. People are not always who they seem. Behind simple appearances can lie great stories. And sometimes, the smallest gestures, a smile, a kind word, a moment of patience, can touch hearts in ways one never imagines. For Maria, the revelation of who Mr. Harris truly was marked a turning point. It was the moment when the quiet puzzle of the lonely customer finally made sense. Yet, more importantly, it was the moment when she realized that her simple way of treating people had left a mark on someone far greater than she had imagined. And though the truth had shaken her with surprise, it also filled her with gratitude. She would never again underestimate the power of seeing people with kindness, because she had learned that even the most ordinary seeming person might hold a story extraordinary enough to change everything. The days after the revelation moved differently for Maria. The quiet man she had once thought of as just a lonely guest was now known to everyone as Mr. Harris, the owner of the hotel. Yet, strangely enough, he did not act any different. He still came to the cafe in the evenings, still chose his usual corner table, and still ordered tea more often than anything else. The only difference now was how the staff around him behaved. Some seemed extra careful, as though every movement was being judged. Others tried to impress him with their politeness. Maria noticed it all, but she also noticed how he quietly preferred people to act naturally. That was why she decided not to change how she treated him. She continued to greet him with the same warmth, to ask him the same light questions, and to serve his tea with the same smile. Deep inside, she felt nervous still, but she reminded herself of what he had told her, that he valued how people behaved when they didn't know who he was. If she became too formal now, it would lose its meaning. So she chose to remain herself, and she saw that he respected that. One evening, when the cafe was almost empty, Mr. Harris looked up from his notebook and spoke to her in a calm but thoughtful tone. "Maria, do you know why I chose this hotel to spend so much time in, even though I own others?" She blinked, a little surprised by the question, and shook her head. "No, sir," she said honestly. He smiled faintly and said, "Because this place still has something real in it. Many hotels become too polished, too artificial. Guests come and go, and no one remembers their faces. But here, I saw something different. I saw people treated as human beings, not just customers. And you, Maria, showed me that more clearly than anyone else." Her heart stirred at his words. She had never thought her simple gestures, smiling at a tired guest, listening to a complaint with patience, or offering a kind word, could hold such value. To her, these were small things. But to him, they had revealed the true spirit of the place he owned. She lowered her eyes shyly, not sure what to say. "I was only doing my job," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "No, you were doing more than that. A job can be done with routine, but kindness comes from the heart. That is something I cannot teach with rules." Those words stayed with her long after he left the cafe that night. She thought about them as she walked home, about how often people overlooked the little moments that truly mattered. She realized then that what she did each day wasn't small at all. Even when no one seemed to notice, her actions built the atmosphere of the hotel, just like the lights, the furniture, and the music did. Perhaps even more. As the weeks passed, Maria began to see changes in the hotel. Mr. Harris, now more openly present as the owner, introduced small improvements. He upgraded some facilities, increased training for staff, and added more care to guest services. But what touched Maria most was how often he reminded everyone that kindness mattered more than luxury. "People forget the design of a chair," he once told the staff, "but they never forget how someone made them feel." Maria took those words to heart. She began encouraging her colleagues to see their work differently. If a guest seemed impatient, she reminded them to stay calm. If someone looked lonely, she suggested offering a friendly word. Slowly, she noticed the atmosphere in the hotel grow warmer, more genuine. It wasn't just a place for travelers anymore, it began to feel like a place where people belonged, even for a short while. Her own relationship with Mr. Harris also grew more open, though always respectful. Sometimes, when the cafe was quiet, they would talk about simple things, books, places they liked, even childhood memories. He told her about the early days when he had nothing but a small dream of owning a single inn. Through hard work, he had grown it into something bigger, but he admitted that success often came with loneliness. "People see the wealth," he said once, "but they don't see the silence it leaves behind." Maria listened carefully. In those moments, she no longer saw him as just the owner of the hotel. She saw him as a man who carried both achievements and burdens. She realized then that her first impression of him, as a lonely man in the cafe, had not been entirely wrong. He had wealth, he had respect, but he still carried a kind of solitude inside him. And perhaps, in her simple kindness, he had found a touch of comfort. One afternoon, after a particularly busy shift, Mr. Harris spoke to her again in a serious tone. "Maria, do you remember your dream of opening a cafe?" She laughed softly, embarrassed. "Yes, but it's just a dream. I don't think it will ever happen." "Why not?" he asked, his eyes steady on hers. "Because dreams take money and time and courage," she replied honestly. He smiled gently. "Sometimes all they need is belief. And sometimes, someone to believe in you." She didn't know what he meant by that, but the words sank deep in her heart. For the first time, she began to imagine that her dream might not be so impossible. As months passed, Maria grew more confident in her work. The revelation about Mr. Harris had changed her, but in a good way. She no longer saw her role as small. She understood that her place in the hotel mattered, that her kindness could touch lives far beyond what she imagined. And every time she looked at the corner table in the cafe, she remembered how easily she could have dismissed him as just another guest. It became a lesson she would never forget: never judge people by appearances, because behind the simplest faces might lie stories far greater than one can guess. One evening, as Maria closed her shift, Mr. Harris paused near the desk before leaving. He looked at her with the same calm smile he had given her since the first day. "Maria," he said softly, "thank you for never changing who you are, even after you knew." She felt her eyes grow warm with emotion. "Thank you," she replied, "for showing me that even small things matter." He gave a gentle nod and walked away, leaving her with a sense of quiet pride. For Maria, life at the hotel would go on with the same daily rhythm: greeting guests, solving problems, smiling through long shifts. But deep inside, she was no longer the same. She carried with her the knowledge that her work had touched someone far beyond what she imagined. And as she stood at the reception desk that night, watching the lights of the lobby glow softly, she realized something important. The story she had lived, the story of a lonely customer who turned out to be the owner, was not just about surprise. It was about seeing the value of kindness, of honesty, of treating everyone with respect, no matter who they were. That was the memory she would keep forever. A story she could tell herself whenever life felt ordinary, reminding her that even the most ordinary days can hold the most extraordinary truths.